What if the death of one man changed the fate of the world forever? Julius Caesar rose from a young noble to Rome's most powerful leader, beloved by the people, feared by the Senate. But behind the walls of power, whispers turned to daggers. Betrayal, blood, and ambition would not only end Caesar's life, but also end the Roman Republic itself, and begin an empire that still shapes history today. How did one man climb from a noble family's son to Rome's most powerful ruler? Julius Caesar was born into a patrician family, but not one of great wealth or dominance at that time. From the beginning, he carried the pride of Roman nobility while facing the struggles of limited resources. He learned quickly that in Rome, power came not only from heritage, but from ambition, alliances, and achievements. Caesar chose the path of politics and military service, knowing that Rome respected victories in battle as much as it respected laws in the Senate. In his early career, Caesar built his reputation as a skilled orator and clever politician. He understood the art of winning the people's trust through reforms and favors. At the same time, he served in the military and proved his bravery, which gave him honor and recognition among soldiers. These experiences shaped him into a leader who was not only admired by the crowd, but also feared by rivals. His real fame came during his military campaigns, especially in Gaul. Caesar did not just fight wars. He wrote about them in detail, making sure the Roman people knew of his victories. Every triumph added to his glory, and every speech won him more supporters. His soldiers adored him, his people praised him, and his enemies grew uneasy. Caesar's rise was not just about conquest, it was about understanding the hearts of both common citizens and loyal armies. Yet this growing popularity created a sharp divide in Rome. The ordinary people saw him as a hero who gave them hope, while many senators saw him as a dangerous man who was gathering too much influence. The more his power expanded, the more suspicion grew among Rome's elite. But the higher Caesar climbed, the more dangerous enemies he made in Rome. What happens when the Senate fears the man they once trusted? As Julius Caesar's victories grew, so did his control over the Roman state. The Senate, once the most powerful body in Rome, now watched as Caesar's influence overshadowed theirs. Many senators had supported him in the past, believing his leadership would strengthen the Republic. But as he gained more titles, honors, and authority, fear slowly replaced their trust. The turning point came when Caesar was declared dictator for life. In Roman tradition, a dictator was meant to hold power only for a short emergency. It was never meant to be permanent. By granting Caesar this lifelong title, the Senate felt they had allowed one man to take control of the entire republic. To his supporters, Caesar was a reformer who brought stability after years of chaos. To his opponents, he looked like a king in all but name. And Romans hated kings. The very foundation of the republic was built on rejecting monarchy. Whispers began to spread through the Senate chambers and private gatherings. Some senators muttered that Caesar's ambition was too great, that he would never let go of power willingly. Others feared for their own positions, knowing Caesar's reforms weakened the old aristocracy's privileges. The thought of Rome falling into the hands of one absolute ruler filled them with dread. Among these whispers, small groups began to meet in secret. They discussed Caesar's power, his future, and what might happen if no one stopped him. Some argued that Rome needed him, while others believed the Republic itself would collapse under his rule. The quiet discussions soon turned into urgent debates, and urgent debates became dangerous ideas. And in those whispers, a deadly plan began to take shape. Behind closed doors, powerful men gathered with one dangerous idea. The unease in the Senate had turned into secret meetings, and soon a conspiracy began to form. At the center of it stood Cassius, a senator with sharp ambition and deep resentment toward Caesar. Cassius believed that Caesar's power threatened not only the Senate's authority, but also the very survival of the Republic. He knew that action had to be taken, but he also knew he could not do it alone. Cassius reached out to other senators who shared his fear. Some were driven by genuine concern for Rome, while others were motivated by jealousy and personal rivalry. Slowly, a circle of conspirators began to grow, bound by their desire to stop Caesar. Yet, even with numbers, Cassius understood that their plan would lack strength without one key figure, Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was respected across Rome as a man of honor, known for his loyalty to the Republic and his fair judgment. More importantly, he shared a close friendship with Caesar. To Cassius, this connection was both a challenge and an opportunity. If Brutus joined the conspiracy, their actions would appear not as treason, but as a noble defense of the Republic. Without Brutus, the plot would look like nothing more than envy and betrayal. Cassius began to work on Brutus with careful words, reminding him of Rome's traditions, its hatred of kings, and its fragile freedom. He appealed to Brutus's sense of duty, suggesting that Caesar's rule would destroy everything their ancestors had built. Slowly, doubt crept into Brutus's mind. The conspiracy now had a shape, with meetings, promises, and a vision of Rome without Caesar. Yet one question still hung heavy over their secret gatherings. But could Brutus really betray the man he once called a friend? What is stronger, friendship or duty to Rome? For Brutus, this question became a heavy weight on his mind. He had shared trust, respect, and even affection with Caesar. To Brutus, Caesar was more than just a ruler. He was a companion and mentor. Yet, the thought of Rome falling into the hands of a single permanent dictator haunted him. The Republic had survived for centuries because no one man could hold absolute power. If Caesar destroyed that balance, Rome itself could crumble. The conspirators knew Brutus's heart was torn. They pressed him with arguments that played on his love for Rome and his fear of tyranny. They reminded him of his ancestors, who had fought to drive out Rome's kings long ago. Cassius whispered that if Brutus stood with them, the people would see the plot not as murder, but as justice. Without him, their actions would look selfish and dishonorable. Brutus resisted at first, but doubt continued to grow. Could he stay loyal to Caesar if it meant betraying the Republic? In long nights of reflection, Brutus wrestled with his conscience. Loyalty pulled him one way, duty the other. Finally, his sense of obligation to Rome outweighed his personal ties. With a heavy heart, he agreed to join the conspiracy. The decision sealed Caesar's fate, for Brutus's name gave the plot legitimacy. To many, if Brutus believed Caesar must be stopped, then it must be the right thing to do. The conspirators now felt confident, certain that with Brutus's honor on their side, the people would accept their actions. Their plan was set, and their unity seemed unbreakable. And with Brutus on their side, the conspirators believed success was guaranteed. But little did they know, Caesar had already been warned. What if the greatest man in Rome was told he would soon die? As Caesar's power reached its peak, a shadow of warning began to follow him. During a public gathering, a soothsayer approached and spoke the words that would echo through history. "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar, amused, brushed it aside, asking the man to repeat himself, only to hear the same caution. To many, it seemed like superstition, but the warning lingered in the air, unsettling those who heard it. At home, Caesar's wife Calpurnia became deeply troubled by her own fears. She dreamed of his death, seeing images of Caesar's statue running with blood while Romans bathed their hands in it. To her, it was no ordinary nightmare, but a message from the gods. She begged her husband not to attend the Senate on the Ides of March, pleading with him to stay safe. Caesar listened but hesitated. He was not a man easily swayed by fear. Across Rome, other strange signs appeared. Sacrificial animals showed bad omens. Storms struck at unusual times, and whispers spread of unnatural events. Many Romans spoke of these warnings as signs that the gods themselves were displeased. Even some of Caesar's closest allies grew uneasy, urging caution. But Caesar's pride was stronger than his doubt. He saw himself as favored by fortune, a man destined to rise above all threats. To him, avoiding the Senate because of dreams and omens would make him appear weak. He chose instead to show strength, to laugh in the face of warnings. Yet Caesar laughed off the warnings, even as the fateful day approached. On the morning of the Ides of March, fate knocked at Caesar's door. The night had been restless. Calpurnia, shaken by her dreadful dream, pleaded once again that her husband should not leave home. She begged him to listen to the warnings, to think of the danger, and to place his life above politics for once. For a brief moment, Caesar gave in to her fears. He decided he would not go to the Senate. But the conspirators had planned too carefully to let hesitation ruin everything. Decius, one of the plotters, arrived at Caesar's house. When he heard that Caesar intended to stay home, he quickly turned Calpurnia's nightmare into something flattering. He told Caesar that the dream did not mean death. It meant Rome drew its strength from him, that the flowing blood symbolized renewal, not disaster. Then, with careful words, he added the most tempting thought of all. The Senate was prepared to crown Caesar as king, but only if he came that very day. The suggestion struck at Caesar's deepest ambition. Though he dismissed the title of king publicly, in private he longed for it. The chance to claim such honor was too great to resist. Pride pushed aside fear, and he chose to go. Calpurnia's pleas were ignored as Decius escorted him out. The conspirators, waiting in the Senate, prepared themselves. They had sharpened their resolve for this single moment. Yet not all hearts were steady. Among the group, doubts whispered quietly. Some feared failure, others worried about the shame of spilling blood in the Senate. Unity, which had seemed so strong, now carried cracks. And with that decision, Caesar walked straight into the trap. But the conspirators were not as united as they seemed. Doubts began to appear among them. Inside Pompey's theater, every glance carried suspicion. The Senate house was filled with men who bowed and smiled, but many of those smiles were false. Beneath their flowing togas, sharp daggers lay hidden, ready to strike. Each conspirator played his role carefully, pretending loyalty while their hearts raced with the weight of what was about to happen. Caesar entered with confidence, his presence commanding as always. He greeted senators with warmth, exchanging words as if nothing were unusual. To him, these were colleagues and friends, men who had shared victories, debates, and years of service. He had no reason to suspect the deadly secret concealed within the gathering. Yet the air inside the chamber was heavy. Every movement seemed charged with meaning. The conspirators, while pretending calm, grew restless. They shifted positions, inching closer to Caesar, forming a circle around him. Each man waited for the signal, but nerves threatened to undo them. Some senators, not part of the plot, sensed the strange tension, but remained silent, unsure of what was unfolding. As the circle tightened, Caesar remained unaware of the danger. He welcomed their closeness as a sign of respect. To him, the gathering was ordinary business, another meeting in the life of Rome's leader. But to the conspirators, this was the final moment before their plan became reality. Their hands brushed the hidden hilts of their daggers, their eyes darting toward one another, searching for courage. The chamber grew still, as if holding its breath. Every second felt stretched, every glance sharper than the last. Caesar, unaware, continued to stand tall among men who had already judged his fate. And then, the first knife was drawn. The moment Rome would never forget had arrived. As Caesar stood among the senators, Casca suddenly stepped forward. With a trembling hand, he drew his dagger and struck the first blow. Startled, Caesar cried out in shock, grabbing Casca's arm, trying to push him away. For an instant, confusion filled the room. Was this madness or treachery? But then the others moved. One by one, the conspirators rushed forward, their blades flashing as they stabbed again and again. The chamber erupted into chaos. Caesar, caught between disbelief and fury, tried to fight back. He pushed, struggled, and shouted, but he was surrounded on all sides. The men he once trusted now turned against him, their hands striking with deadly resolve. The scene was brutal. Daggers pierced his body from every angle, cutting through the fabric of his toga and tearing into flesh. Caesar staggered, his strength failing as the wounds multiplied. Blood stained the Senate floor, and yet the attackers did not stop. Each conspirator wanted his strike to be counted. each man determined to claim a share in the deed. At first, Caesar resisted, raising his arms to block the blades, attempting to stand firm against the storm of betrayal. But with each new wound, his energy slipped away. His voice, once strong enough to command armies, grew faint. The greatest man in Rome, who had marched through countless battles, now fell under the hands of supposed allies. The Senate chamber, once a place of debate, had become the site of one of history's most infamous murders. Caesar's fate was sealed in blood, his power broken by those he thought he ruled. But the final blow would come from the man he least expected. What hurts more, death or betrayal? Already weakened by countless wounds, Caesar could barely stand as the conspirators pressed in. Then, through the blur of pain, he saw Brutus approach. This was the man he had trusted like a son, the friend whose loyalty he had never doubted. For a moment, Caesar's defenses lowered. Surely Brutus would stop the madness. But Brutus raised his dagger. With a heavy heart, he struck his blade into Caesar. The shock was deeper than any wound to his body. In that instant, Caesar understood the full weight of betrayal. His voice, faint but filled with sorrow, carried the words that would echo through history. Et tu, Brute. If even Brutus could turn against him, then there was no hope left. Staggering back, Caesar's strength finally gave way. His bloodied figure collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, a bitter symbol of fate. He, who had defeated rivals across the world, fell beneath the stone gaze of a leader from Rome's past. The Senate chamber, meant to uphold the Republic, was now marked forever by the murder of its greatest ruler. The conspirators stepped back, their daggers dripping, their breaths heavy. For a moment, silence filled the room. They had done what they set out to do. Caesar was dead. They looked upon his body with a mix of triumph, relief, and unease. The man who ruled Rome was gone, but what would Rome do without him? The conspirators thought Rome would cheer. Instead, chaos was about to begin. How does a city react when its leader is murdered in daylight? Word of Caesar's death spread like wildfire through Rome. At first, disbelief filled the streets. How could the most powerful man in the Republic, a man worshipped almost like a god, fall so suddenly? But as the truth settled in, fear took hold. Citizens fled from the Senate House, terrified that more violence might follow. Shops closed, markets emptied, and the usual rhythm of Rome dissolved into chaos. Inside, the conspirators tried to calm the storm they had created. They raised their blood-stained hands and declared they had freed the Republic from tyranny. They spoke of saving liberty, of protecting Rome from becoming a kingdom under one man. To them, the assassination was not murder, but sacrifice, a noble act done for the future of the state. But outside the chamber, the people were not convinced. Many had loved Caesar deeply. He had given them land, food, and festivals. He had marched with soldiers, fought beside them, and brought glory to Rome. For the poor and for the common people, Caesar was not a tyrant. He was a hero. The conspirators' words fell flat against their grief and confusion. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. Was the Republic really saved, or had Rome lost its greatest protector? Fear of civil war grew heavier with each hour. Families stayed indoors, waiting for what might come next. The streets that had once cheered Caesar's triumphs now echoed with silence and unease. But another voice was rising in Rome, one that would change everything. What if Caesar's death created an even greater enemy? Among the chaos, one man kept his fury hidden: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally and friend. When he entered the Senate after the assassination, he found Caesar's lifeless body on the floor, still bleeding from countless wounds. Rage boiled inside him, but Antony masked his true feelings with calm words. He approached the conspirators carefully, pretending to understand their actions. If he openly opposed them now, he too might be cut down. The conspirators, wary of Antony's power, hesitated, but Antony's smooth words reassured them. He claimed he would not fight their cause, only asking one favor: to give Caesar a proper funeral. They debated among themselves, but in the end, they agreed. Allowing Antony to speak would show Rome that they were not murderers, but defenders of freedom. At least, that was what they believed. In truth, Antony had no intention of supporting their version of events. His loyalty to Caesar ran too deep. Behind his controlled expression, he was already planning his revenge. The funeral would not be a peaceful farewell, but the stage for a storm. He knew the people still loved Caesar. If he could speak directly to their grief and anger, he could turn Rome against the men who now walked free with bloody hands. So Antony bided his time, nodding respectfully, shaking hands with men he longed to destroy. He appeared to be an ally, but in his heart, he sharpened his words like daggers. He was not only planning to honor Caesar, he was preparing to ignite the fury of the people, and at the funeral, his words would set Rome on fire. One speech can change the course of history. At Caesar's funeral, the people gathered in the Forum, anxious and torn between grief and confusion. The conspirators stood proudly, believing their words had already convinced Rome that Caesar's death was necessary. But then Mark Antony rose to speak, and the mood began to shift. He started softly, praising the conspirators for their supposed honor. The crowd listened politely, unsure of his true intent. Then Antony turned his words toward Caesar. He spoke of Caesar's generosity, his victories, and his love for the people of Rome. His voice carried sorrow, not anger, and the crowd leaned closer. Slowly, Antony unveiled Caesar's bloodied cloak, pointing to each stab wound. He named the men who had struck them, saving Brutus for last. With each tear in the fabric, the crowd gasped, their grief deepening into rage. Then came the final blow. Antony revealed Caesar's will. The document left money and land not to senators or nobles, but to the common citizens of Rome. Even in death, Caesar had thought of them. This revelation shattered the conspirators' image of acting for the Republic. If Caesar had been a tyrant, why would he give so much to the people? Murmurs turned to cries, and cries to roars of anger. The Forum erupted in fury. Antony's speech had done what swords could not. It had united the people against the conspirators. No walls, no words could protect them now. Rome was a city in mourning, but also in rebellion. And with the people's fury unleashed, bloodshed was inevitable. But Rome was not only about to face riots, it was about to plunge into civil war. Caesar's death ended a life, but began an empire. The streets of Rome soon drowned in chaos. Angry citizens, inflamed by Antony's words, turned on the conspirators. Riots erupted, homes were burned, and the once proud liberators fled for their lives. The men who had claimed to save the Republic were now hunted as traitors. Brutus and Cassius tried to rally support beyond Rome, raising armies to defend their cause. They declared they had acted for freedom, but their words no longer held power. The people remembered Caesar's generosity, his victories, and his will that gave them land and wealth. The Senate's authority was broken, and loyalty shifted toward Antony and Caesar's young heir, Octavian. Though only a teenager, Octavian was determined to claim his place as Caesar's rightful successor. The struggle soon escalated into civil war. At Philippi, Brutus and Cassius faced the combined forces of Antony and Octavian. The battle was fierce, but the conspirators' hopes crumbled. Cassius, believing all was lost, took his own life. Brutus fought bravely, but met the same fate, falling on his own sword. The men who had struck Caesar down now lay dead themselves, undone by the very republic they sought to protect. In the years that followed, Octavian outmaneuvered even Antony, becoming the sole ruler of Rome. He would later be known as Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The republic that Brutus and Cassius had sworn to defend was gone, replaced by an empire built on Caesar's name and blood. The irony was undeniable. By killing Caesar, the conspirators had not saved freedom. They had buried it. The daggers that killed Caesar did not save the republic. They destroyed it forever.